It's the International Soccer Preview. We are Soccer Files Canada. Welcome to Series 25, looking at the players of Euro 2024. This episode is looking at the players of Germany. Here we go. Hello and welcome again to the International Soccer Preview by Soccer Files Canada. I'm Kevin and we continue Series 25 on the groups and players of the 2024 Euro Cup. This episode covers Germany's players. It's in fact part 2 of the Players Mediacast, where we look at the selections. In part 1, we made a list of the candidates and introduced them and their likelihood of making the squad. And there is a link to part 1 in the show notes. This episode will be divided into 3 sections. In section 1, we look over the list that we compiled in part 1 to see who made it and who didn't. In section 2, we summarize surprises in the selections and we review injuries. And in section 3, we revisit the prediction of starters in light of the warm-up games. Before we begin, I am usually trying to wear the same shirt that I wore when doing part 1. However, in the meantime, my wife bought me this Germany shirt for my birthday, so I am delighted and kind of had to wear it. I'm 39 once again. Okay, let's move on to the section 1. We're going to use our list of candidates here and spell out which ones made it and which one didn't. So Julian Nagelsmann has kept his job in the meantime, so we'll consider him having made the squad. And on to goalkeepers, the biggest surprise is here, at least for me. We had definite candidate Marc-Andre ter Stegen as a definite candidate, and he was selected. We had Bernd Leno as the first likely candidate, and he was not selected. Then Oliver Baumann, the other likely candidate, was selected. Neither of the possible candidates, Kevin Trapp or Janis Blaswich, was selected. And then we get to kind of maybe my embarrassment, Manuel Neuer. I had him as retired. I spoke of him that way. And I knew the situation. He was basically injured from after the World Cup up until March 2024. However, I saw that even though he was injured from after the World Cup to basically October 2023, there was a period where he was playing for his club. And he wasn't called up for the November games in the November international period. By the time March came around in 2024, he was injured again, that for just a short time. So I just assumed he wasn't playing for the squad. German fans might have been listening and saying, what are you talking about? Or they might have been saying that I was right and they too thought that he was off the squad. But lo and behold, he was selected. And so he is the third keeper here. And that came to me at least as a surprise. Okay, moving on to defenders. We have a definite candidate in Antonio Rudiger, and he was selected. A likely candidate in Jonathan Tah, also selected. 5 possible candidates here. The first one, Nicolas Sula, was not selected, and nor was the second, Malik Thiaw. But the third one, Waldemar Anton, was selected, as was Robin Koch. And we also had Matt Hummels on the list. He was not selected. The possible but unlikely candidate, Ginter Matthias, turned out to have an injury, ankle tendon problem and surgery since late March until June 30th. I'm not sure if I talked about that in part 1. But anyway, he was possible but unlikely, that injury making him that much more unlikely. We still go down through the list because one of our possible but unlikely candidates made it. It wasn't Thilo Kehrer, but it was Nico Schlotterbeck making the squad. So I'll just reiterate why we had him as an unlikely candidate, even though he would start a starter in World Cup 2022. Where he lost his starting position. He had only started 3 of their 13 games since the World Cup. He was on the bench for 3, injured for 1, and then not selected for the last 6 matches. So I think possible and unlikely was correct given his record. Now, I got to say, unlike the English game Premier League, which I follow, there's a lot of time between March and the end of the season for players to kind of prove their form, so German fans will have better insight into why these players are being selected than I do, which is I have a more kind of an overhead view on things. Anyway, there we go. 5 central defenders selected for the squad. And I should have said, actually, that Germany only put out a 27-man preliminary roster here. So we're not going to see, we'll see one candidate on the preliminary squad alone, rather than a bunch of preliminary candidates who didn't make the final cut. Over to the left-back position, we had 2 likely candidates, David Raum and newcomer Maximilian Mittelstadt, and both of those were selected. Are possible but unlikely, Robin Gosens, not selected. On to right backs, Joshua Kimmich was a definite candidate, and he is on the squad, as is Benjamin Henrichs, who we had as a likely candidate. We had 2 possible but unlikely candidates, Lucas Klostermann and Marius Wolf, and neither of those made it. On to the midfield and defensive midfielders. We had a likely candidate in Robert Andrich, and he made the squad. We also had a possible candidate in Emery Chan. I'll just say here that he didn't initially make the squad, but was added to it. And he was added to it because of the next candidate, Alexander Pavlovich, who did make the squad, but then was removed from the squad due to illness, a tonsillitis case there. So just give me a second. I'm gonna put him in purple to show that he's been replaced, and Emery Chan in yellow to show that he was the replacement. So Emery Chan making the squad. He hadn't been selected for the 2022 World Cup squad. Central midfielders, well, we're going to see a lot of changes here in the warm-up games and actually the March games, but we have him as a central midfielder, and we had him as a definite candidate, and he is selected. Pascal Gross was a likely candidate. He was also selected. And we had 3 possible candidates, Leon Goretzka and Jonas Hoffman, neither of those selected, but the third one was Tony Cruz making the squad. We also had 2 possible candidates, Nemecha and Promo, neither of those made it. Okay, sorry about that. I took a little break there. Let's go to, I don't have it on the list here, but we did have 1 candidate as a left midfielder, Julian Brandt. We had him as a possible candidate, but he was not selected. And we had no candidates as right midfielders. So we go to left attacking. Definite candidate, Florian Wirtz, was selected. Our likely candidate, Jamal Musiala. We had him out with a knee injury from late April until the end of the season and an unknown return date. For me, that was a pretty big flag. Even if he recovered from the injury, there was the question of fitness. So we did have him as a likely candidate, but kind of a big asterisk on his availability. But he was selected, Jamal Musiala. and our possible candidate, Chris Purick, also selected. Possible but unlikely, Jan Nicholas Best, not selected. Right attack, we have Leroy Sané as a definite candidate. He was selected. Serge Gnabry, he was, yes, not an injury doubt. I think we knew that he was out. He was out with a torn muscle bundle since mid-April. Maybe he was a doubt because he did play a couple of games in early May, but then seemed to re-injure it and didn't play the last few games of the season. And he is not expected back until July 15th. I'm not sure if we had all of those details, but anyway, he was not selected. So that was likely the reason why. Although he was only at possible candidate level. And then we had Kevin Schade as a possible but unlikely candidate. He was not selected. Central attacking midfield. Well, we did have a couple of candidates, but we knew they were off the squad, so we won't mention that. We had for secondary strikers, just one candidate, the likely Thomas Muller, and he was selected. And then among the forwards, we had definite candidate Nicholas Füllkrug, who was selected, and Kai Havertz also selected. In fact, both possible candidates here were also selected. That is Maximilian Bayer and Dennis Undav, both making the squad. Our possible but unlikely candidates, Timo Werner and Marvin Duksch, were not selected. Timo Werner, in addition to being legitimately possible but unlikely, had a thigh injury hanging over him with an unknown return date, so making him that much less likely. Okay, and I got to go back to goalkeepers because I forgot to mention the one candidate that was added to the list. I hope I'm not making YouTube watchers dizzy by blasting through the list here. But anyway, we do have, we did have a new candidate. It's a story with the start and finish, though. It's in addition to the confusion among keepers that Manuel Neuer caused, one was added. This was the one player on the preliminary squad, and it was Alexander Nubel, the 28-year-old goalkeeper for Bayern Munich. He's on Bayern Munich's roster, but was on loan to Stuttgart since 2023 and Monaco before that. So Alexander Nubel kind of came and went there. The only player on the preliminary squad. Oh, I'm making people dizzy again. Okay, let's move to section 2, where we review some of the unexpected things there. So I guess rather than saying Manuel Neuer came out of retirement, we'll have to say that he recovered from injury, whatever the reason was. He is a surprise. Sorry, I'm doing injuries there. I got to do surprises. So, well, actually, we'll begin with notable non-selections, but it's related because Manuel Neuer was chosen. Bernd Leno, who we had as a likely candidate, was not chosen. So that is really the only big surprise in terms of non-selection. Surprise inclusions. Here's where we'll also put Manuel Neuer, at least a surprise to me. I'm actually curious to see what German fans make of it, whether they kind of knew that he wasn't off the squad. Nico Schlotterbeck, again, maybe not a surprise to German fans. I think the manager was quite enthusiastic about him, but we had him as a possible but unlikely candidate. And so it came as a surprise. And not really a surprise, Emre Can, well, whether you consider it a surprise, left off the squad and then reinstated into the squad. So whichever element of that surprises you, or perhaps none at all, really by our accounting, not really at all, because he was a possible candidate. And so he could have gone either way. And then new players, well, we'll throw in Alexander Nubel here, who was selected, and then was the only player cut from the preliminary squad. Poor fellow getting his hopes up like that. Okay, now we're on to injury again. We could consider Manuel Neuer recovered from injury, or coming out of retirement, whichever it is. For me, it was those not being called up for the November games when he was healthy that confused the issue. So anyway, we'll consider him recovered from injury, and we should put Jamal Musiala there because he did play 2 games, as we'll see. I'm still considering him a bit of an injury doubt. A knee injury in late April seems something to worry about to me. So he is selected for the roster, but I wonder if they'll be nursing that injury. Again, he started the 2 warm-up games, so probably not. Anyway, dropped due to injury. Well, we're not dead sure if Serge Gnabry was dropped due to injury, because we only had him as a possible candidate. But the injury made it impossible for him to join. Anyway, not due back until July 15th. From that injury. Definitely dropped due to injury. That's why we have him in purple on the YouTube feed, is Alexander Pavlovich. Not injury, but illness with tonsillitis. So the youngster making it to the squad and then having to drop out. Finally, we have players who were injured but not strong candidates. Matthias Ginter. We had him as possible but unlikely, and Timo Werner also we had as possible but unlikely, but injuries may have played a part in that decision there. Okay, we move on to section 3, our predicted starters. So we're going to talk about what happened in the two friendlies. The first one was with Ukraine, and the second in Greece, both of those in Germany. I think Nuremberg and Mönchengladbach, yeah. Okay. So we'll start with the manager and just talk about what we think the manager was trying to achieve in this selection. So we saw a lot of chopping and changing from January 2023. That's why we really couldn't commit to nominating many starters when we did this in part 1. But looking at the lineups in the warm-up game suggests that the decisions he made in March are the ones that he's going forward with. So a lot of the players who kind of appeared in March, in many cases suddenly appeared in March as starters, are also starting here. I got to say, though, that I'm not fully confident that they won't be more rethinking and changing before the tournament. That may be a bit cynical because, you know, players who started both in March and started both here seem a fairly firm decision, but there was just so much chopping and changing before that that I'm reluctant to kind of cement my decisions. Anyway, let's go to goalkeeper, where we perhaps made the biggest gaffe of all, because we nominated with fairly good confidence Ter Stegen, Marc-Andre Ter Stegen, as the starter there. Well, I'm not going to reiterate all the reasons we had. You could go back to part 1 if you want that discussion, but anyway, now we have to change it, and I'm actually going to put Ter Stegen as a possible, and Manuel Neuer as a possible, kind of hedging my bets a little bit there, because I mean, Neuer just came in for the 2 warm-up games. It's possible that he was just being given field time. I kind of doubt it, though. If Manuel Neuer comes back to your team, he's going to be the starter. But just being a bit conservative there. But I would nod now towards Manuel Neuer, say 60% him and 40% Ter Stegen. Okay, let's move on to central defense. And we did nominate Antonio Rudiger as a definite. I was trying to avoid using blue because I wanted to just give kind of firm decisions on who we thought was starters. Now I'm going to use blue, and blue kind of indicates one of two things: kind of a more than possible but less than probable. Or it could be a rotation of players, two players we think we're going to rotate, who we'll put in blue. On that basis, I would have put Jonathan Tah in blue on the part one run through. In the warm up games, the pairing was Jonathan Tah with Anton. There with possible candidate Waldemar Anton in the first game, so that was a surprise. But then it returned back to the pairing that we expect, Tah and Rudiger. So I've lost a little confidence in Rudiger being the starter because of that, and gained a bit of confidence in Tah being the starter because of that. I think I will put them both in green. Both in green, though, because I don't see Waldemar Anton as really threatening the position. Okay, over to left backs. Well, David Raum was a starter in the cup, and I've kind of always held out hope that he would hold on to his position through all the chopping and changing that went on in 2023. All sorts of players used there, but in the last two games, it was Middlestad. And in the two warm-up games, it was Middlestad. So that is a fairly clear message. And nevertheless, I'm going to hedge by just putting him in blue rather than in green. But he definitely seems to be ahead of Rome right now. So if I had a color between green and blue, I would choose that. Over to the right-back position, Joshua Kimmich was used in both games. So there was a lot of chopping and changing here that made us not nominate a starter on the first run through. But Kimmich did start the two games in March and now started the two warm-up games. We're going to see that pattern repeated several times. Anyway, I'm now ready to nominate Joshua Kimmich as the starting right back. Up to defensive midfield. This situation too was quite a bit weird actually during the 2023. So for most of 2023, we saw Kimmich playing as a defensive midfielder with Gundogan and Goretzka. That's really simplifying a complex matter. But you know, that's kind of what emerged as a generalization. Emre Can sometimes joining that rotation. However, towards the end, we saw Gross make a couple appearances, and then it suddenly changed to Cruz and Andrich. So we were very confused, and of course we didn't nominate any starters here. We thought it was kind of all over the place. In the warm-up games, in the first game, it was Pascal Gross and alongside Andrich. And in the second game, it was Andrich as well, alongside Tony Cruz. So still a bit chaotic there. We don't know what's become. Well, we know what's become of Kimmich and Gundogan. They've moved to different positions, as we saw with Kimmich. Goretzka, though, has kind of just disappeared. Anyway, through all of that, we are going to nominate Robert Andrich as a likely candidate. We're going to put him in blue as a kind of the player we most expect to start, and also Tony Cruz. So we're not really confident about that, but we are going with it because the manager seems to be sticking with decisions made in March. Okay, up to the attacking end of the field. Well, Florian Wirtz has never been in doubt in part one, and he was selected as the left attacking player in both of the games of the warm-up. So that just strengthened our resolve that Florian Wirtz will be the definite candidate. On the right, it was very kind of mixed up. We saw switching, and confusing things further was players from the left coming over to the right, and players from the right moving over. Not so much to the left. Anyway, Sane was there. But Gnabry was there a couple of times as well. We saw Wirtz and Musiala appearing. However, in the last two games, Musiala was the starter, and in the two warm-up games, despite his injury concern, Musiala was the starter as well. But we're going to put him in blue, and actually he was on the left side on our list. We're going to move him over to the right and put him in blue because that injury concern, and as I said at the beginning, I'm not convinced that the manager won't make more changes. So Jamal Musiala, though, the most likely candidate as it seems right now. And then in the central attacking midfield, well, we saw that Gundogan was we were confident in him as a central midfielder. In March, though, after much chopping and changing in their central attacking midfield position, they landed on Ilkay Gundogan, and we had talked about in part one that he's a pretty versatile midfielder, defensive and offensive. So they've moved him from defense to offense, and he has started both warm-up games as the central attacking midfielder. So again, we're not confident enough to put him in green, but we'll put that in blue as the probable starter there. Onto the forward line, and I realized that I forgot to summarize this position in part one. I won't go over the whole thing again, but in short, as with many other positions, there was a lot of chopping and changing. Fulkrug was probably used the most, but then Havertz came in and started the last two. So we see this pattern again because Havertz started the two warm-up games as well. So now we are, again, I'm going to make it blue. Not with full confidence, but we do kind of predict him as the starting forward, given the patterns we see. All right, that brings us to the end. Closing thoughts on Germany. Well, perhaps the manager is sorting out the confusion that we saw in 2023 and making some firm decisions for the squad. It'll be a surprise if he suddenly chops and changes a bit more in the lineup for the first game of the squad, but it looks like he is really looking to nail things down here. So even though I have a lot of the predicted starters in blue, it's a slightly green tinted blue. Okay, that is it. We would like to thank Mike Tripak, Big Sound Music, and Pixabay for the wonderful background music called Dance 90s accompanying this mediacast.